they can say perfect. So they can say hello. And so I'm going to add a spotlight to Mark. Hello, Mark. Thank you for joining us
Hello,
today.
Jenny. Thank you for doing this. I'm so excited to be here. I've been lucky enough to have been working on this exhibit oh, for I think it was like 3 years before it opened, and seeing this all come together and being a part of it. And I was invited to write the exhibit because I wrote several books about orcas, including 3 books for kids, one of them called Orcas Everywhere. So I know that right now Jenny's about to take us in through the tale of the orca, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And
So
one of the things that's so fantastic about this exhibit is it gives you the sense of being under the waves and really kind of entering the orca's world, which I think is just so lovely. And like, yeah, Jenny's showing you right now the wave effects, and those sort of vary from gallery to gallery. So we're kicking off with a traditional feasting dish. And one of the things that's so fantastic about this, if you are aware of the southern resident orcas, who are the most famous whales in the world and really the stars of this exhibit, their traditional feast was basically the same traditional feast that went in this dish, which was salmon. So if you were to lift up that dorsal fin, you would have found a feast that would have often consisted of salmon. And there are all sorts of great things to know about that feasting dish, but I think we're going in to meet the big guys who are the stars of the exhibit right now.
yes.
And you're about to meet 3 members of JPod. Now, one thing that one thing that if you're living in Vancouver Island, you tend to be really aware that there are different types of orcas. If you're living almost everywhere else, like orcas are killer whales, and you may not be aware that not only are there different types, really essentially different species of orcas, but there are 3 different types of orcas that you find off the coast of the Sailor Sea. And the most famous ones are these guys. So this is Ruffles, and Ruffles was identified as J1. JPod and all of the southern residents and all of the orcas out here on the Sailor Sea were originally classified, categorized, numbered by Dr. Michael Bigg, who was a scientist who set out to find how many orcas there were in the Sailor Sea. And the reason for that was because people were capturing orcas and nobody was sure how many there were. And there were estimates, there were thousands and thousands, like 10,000 orcas out there. And when he did the first Orca survey, he basically discovered there were hundreds, maybe only a few hundred. I think the initial numbers were 300 and something. So and what was happening was that people were seeing the same dorsal fins over and over and over again and thinking they were actually seeing different whales. And what he realized was that you could identify these whales by their unique markings. So you could identify them by the marking on their back, which is known as the saddle patch. And you could also identify them by the cuts and nicks on their bodies, which he discovered never go away. And this big guy, Ruffles, has ruffles in his dorsal fin. That's how he was ID'd. But Michael Bigg, for the most part, gave these orcas numbers so he could catalog them because scientists needed the numbers to track how many there were. And oh, we could see the eye. Thank you for this. So there are 3 orcas that were recreated for this exhibit, and they're 100% life size, except for one thing. We stop for one sec on Ruffles, Ruffles dorsal again. The only thing that is not life size is Ruffles dorsal fin. Ruffles dorsal fin in real life was about 6 feet tall, which actually would have been just a bit too much for the museum and just a bit too much for some of the museums that this is touring to later. So that's the only thing that isn't quite to scale, but everything else, this is the size of this very huge orca. He became one of the best known orcas, or when he was out there, mostly known as killer whales, when he was swimming around. And this is Slick. Slick is in the Salish Sea now, also a J-pod orca, and she's one of the J-pod matriarchs. And in the world of orcas, moms and grannies rule. Orca society is a matriarchy. And orcas tend to stick around in pods. So the different types of orcas that Michael Bigg identified, he named the residents, and those were salmon eaters. Those are salmon eaters. And the transients. And the transients are mammal eaters. So if you're going, well, how did orcas get to be known as killer whales? It's because mammal eaters are pretty much, mammals are the apex predator of the ocean. The only threat to orcas anywhere is us. And if you've been reading the news this week, a group of mammal eating orcas was just filmed eating a blue whale, an adult blue whale. This is the first time we've seen that orcas can and do attack the single largest being in the ocean. So these guys that you're looking at, the southern residents, they eat Chinook salmon. That's why they're in trouble, because we also eat Chinook salmon and we've eaten too many of them. So this is Slick. She's out there now. She's an orca mom and an orca matriarch. And well, I think we are about to see Scarlet. Now, this is one of Slick's daughters, and Scarlet became one of the most famous whales in the world when there was a rescue attempt made when Scarlet was basically dying of malnourishment and other things. And Scarlet received her name, as many orcas do and did, because of the markings on her back. And if you look up at those, if you see this in the exhibit, or even when you see it now, you might go, oh, wow, somebody scratched up the whale, and think that this is an accident or think that somebody did this in the gallery. No, that is intentional and that is accurate. And the reason Scarlet has those scars is that giving birth for orcas is not always the easiest thing. They have an 18-month gestation period, and it's a difficult birth when you're giving birth to a whale. So in this case, Slick needed help giving birth to Scarlet, and one of the other matriarchs of the southern residents helped deliver Scarlet like a midwife and used her teeth to help deliver the baby. And so those marks on her body, those are tooth marks. Oh, I love that there's a guard in the background. So you can see from the size of the guard just how big these whales are. Right? Look at the size of a human next to the size of Ruffles over there. And you really get a sense these are kind of awesome. Jenny, is there anything you want me to hit in terms of? I was just going to say in
Yeah,
terms of matriarchy or anything like that.
definitely. So, for the matriarchy, so do whales stay with their mothers their whole life?
Yeah, this is one of the amazing discoveries. It's with resident orcas. Mammal-eating orcas have sort of different behaviors, a very different culture, and we're now seeing the word culture applied to animals more and more, and especially to orcas, where it's so apparent because these orcas are so well known. When I say the J-pod and K-pod and L-pod, the southern residents, the most famous whales in the world, they really are. There are three pods, J, K, and L, and these are the whales that have been photographed more times than the royal family or the Cardassians. So we're seeing here as mothers and grandmothers. And one of the things that surprised me most, because I don't have a scientific background, I came at orcas as just somebody who fell in love with them, was discovering that there are only a few species on Earth, besides humans, where females live far beyond their reproductive age. And orcas are one of those species. The others are all marine mammals. And the theory behind this is known as the grandmother hypothesis. And the grandmother hypothesis is that in these really intelligent species, that the wisdom of a grandmother is more important than their reproductive ability. So that's the evolutionary theory behind this. Now, when you hear the southern residents referred to today, people pretty much always call them the critically endangered southern residents. And that's because as I'm recording this, there are only 74 southern residents out there. That doesn't mean that all orcas everywhere are endangered, but the southern residents who live primarily off Chinook salmon, who are the best known and really the most beloved orcas out there, they are endangered, and they're endangered because of lack of food supply and a few other things we're going to talk about later in this exhibit in future visits.
Definitely. Thank you. And to kind of go off of that as well, who we're looking at right now, Ruffles. Was Ruffles always a part of JPod?
That's a great question. One of the From the time scientists began studying these orcas, uh, Ruffles was with JPod and hanging out with Granny. And the way they got their numbers before they were given names was that Michael Big basically photographed them, and whichever whale he saw first, that was J1, second was J2, third was J3. And so Ruffles got the name J1 because he was in the lead when the photographs were taken. Granny, who I made a movie about called The 100-Year-Old Whale, was J2. After Ruffles' death, there was a discovery when scientists discovered that it was likely Ruffles was actually a member of LPOD who decided to hang out with Granny. It is very, very rare for resident orcas to switch pods. But one reason for that is that male orcas stay with their moms their entire lives. And male orcas do not live a long time without their moms. So it's not just that matriarchs have the wisdom. Matriarchs really are the caretakers, caregivers. They've got the oceans wired. So the male orcas will stay with moms their entire life. When they leave their moms, or when their moms die, because they don't leave their moms, when their moms die, the male orcas rarely live that long. And what we've seen on rare occasions, and one of those occasions seems to have been with Ruffles, was that an orca will find a new surrogate mom and switch pods. And there's an orca out there known as Onyx who also decided that he was going to find a new mom when his mom died. And I wrote about Onyx in a book called Orcas of the Salish Sea. Now, Jenny, you wanted me to talk about orcas and dolphins, right?
Yeah, a lot of people say, oh, like orcas, are they just like dolphins? Are they big dolphins? And I know you have answers to those questions.
I do. This is going to be one place where I'm going to actually read a really short excerpt from my book, Orcas Everywhere, because this is such a common question. And I need to say, this was one of the first questions I asked when I began looking into orcas. And I asked the orca expert, Landsbert Leonard, I said, here's the question: is an orca really a whale? And this is from the book. If you walk around with this book long enough, someone will tell you orcas are not really whales. They are the largest member of the dolphin family. This is true, sort of. It's also false. Isn't science awesome? Pretty much every dictionary definition of whale describes a very large marine mammal with a tail fin and a blowhole. Now that sure sounds like an orca to me. When Herman Melville listed every species of whale in Moby Dick, he included the killer. There are more than 70 kinds of whales who have teeth. The largest are sperm whales, like Moby Dick. Orcas are among the largest. So why does anyone think they're dolphins? In 1735, Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus published the first volume of his book, Systema Naturae. This pretty much created the rules scientists still use for categorizing all living things. These rules are known as taxonomy. He originally called orcas Delphinus orca, demon dolphin, and classified them as belonging to the family Delphinidae. As you can guess from the name, this category includes dolphins. When he found out more about killer whales, he changed their name to Orcinus orca, demon from hell, but didn't bother to change their category. Here's the thing. Carl didn't spend much, if any, time around whales. In the first 9 volumes of his book, he said whales were fish. He didn't realize whales were mammals until his book's 10th edition. That was when all whales, dolphins, and porpoises were classified as cetaceans, which comes from the Latin word cetus. Cetus means, you guessed it, whale. Some people will tell you killer whales and short-finned pilot whales are really big dolphins because they're Delphinidae. But it's more accurate to say dolphins and porpoises are really small whales because that's what cetacean means. Meanwhile, Linnaeus lists narwhals, yeah, narwhals, as toothed whales. Have you ever seen a narwhal? This was a term, and just as orcas and pilots are Delphinidae, the most whale-like whales on the planet, blue whales, are known as rorquals. This was a term used to classify really big balleens. So if someone tells you orcas are dolphins, tell them the following. So if someone ever tells you that orcas are dolphins, tell them that following their logic, blue whales aren't whales either, or blow their minds by explaining that dolphins are whales.
Thank you. I know it's such a different idea to think about. That it's a common misperception.
It comes up all the time. It'll be in half the stories you read, and it fascinates me. But really, it's because Delphinidae and dolphin sort of sound the same. So yes, they are the biggest Delphinidae, but if you're going
Definitely.
by that logic, blue whales are rorquals. So I wanted to just quickly hit one more thing. We were talking about names and numbers, and when we were doing this exhibit, the decision was made that it was really important to focus on the names. And one of the reasons for that, one of the reasons that you'll see Ruffles J1 as opposed to J1 or J1 Ruffles is that these names are one of the reasons that people, especially people on the coast in Washington and British Columbia, have been able to fall in love with these whales. It is very difficult to form emotional bonds with numbers. And that's one of the reasons scientists use numbers. You use numbers to create that sense of distance, to create that sense of objectivity. And I don't think that sense of distance or objectivity serves a family that we're trying to save and serves a family that needs our help. So what you're seeing right now are the names of the members of JPod. And, these names, if you look at when we do and don't use names, we usually take names away when we're trying to dehumanize, when we're trying to depersonalize. So using names for the orcas really struck me as essential, and I am so thrilled that that is something that the Royal BC Museum exhibit focuses on with this exhibit, that all of these orcas are identified by their names as well as their numbers. The scientists need the numbers, you and I really don't. So for you and I, that's Scarlet. We need to know that she was Scarlet, not J50. We need to know that Slick's out there, not what Slick's number is. So really wanted to
Definitely.
share that with you.
Yeah, and while the exhibit was being built, we had another orca birth that someone got to name one of, or you could vote on who to name the newest orca, which was very exciting. So kids got to go and vote, and I think the orca's name ended up being Eureka, I think.
Yes. And the way that the Southern residents received their names, and different orchids received their names in different ways. Initially, they were given by the researchers, but the researchers only really named the ones that they could easily ID, like Ruffles. But the Whaling Museum in Friday Harbor somehow got the naming rights in large to the Southern residents, in large part because the Center for Whale Research in Friday Harbor did a lot of the earliest tracking of these whales and was doing the early catalogs. So they started naming the whales, and the Vancouver Aquarium, I think the Vancouver Aquarium does the naming for some of the other groups of whales. But most of the members of JK and LPOD, the Southern residents, received their names generally from the Whaling Museum Friday Harbor, where they will now suggest names and let members of the public choose. But I think they sort of take suggestions
Yes,
and then they poll the public. So
definitely. So we're at the end of the time. There's one couple of quick questions I know we can answer quickly. One is why are they called killer whales when they don't apparently kill people?
the reason they have the name killer whale, they they receive the name killer whales because they kill other whales. So the killer whale sort of comes from various cultures where the names have meant whale killers. So orcas in mammal eating orcas in waters around the world will eat other whales. As
Yes.
we just found out this week, just confirmed this week for the very first time that they will eat blue whales. We already knew they ate every other kinds of whales. And they're really selective, but also probably heard about the orcas in South Africa who are eating sharks and who are eating great whites. Like, they eat anything out there. So if you're on their menu, they're definitely killer whales. But we always think everything's all about us. We're going, killer whales, they must be after us. No, no, they're not after us.
Yes, that
Although
is
I
true.
kind of think we should tell people, we should lie and tell people they are, and then everybody give them a little bit more space and maybe a little bit more food.
Well, next week, we'll actually be going into the Orca lab and looking a little bit more about orca diets and about the life cycle of an orca and echolocation and all those interesting things. So we'll talk a little bit more about that and maybe why some people may associate them as the word killer whale. And one other thing, there was a question of, is this program been developed for kids? And there's a slide up right now that talks about our digital field trips, which we do programs with Mark and with schools about orcas going through this exhibit until the end of the exhibit run, which it ends on March 31st. But it's not just for kids, it can be for community groups or senior groups or anything like that as well. But that is all that we have time for today. So thank you everyone so much for joining Mark and I here at the Royal BC Museum. And we hope to see you next week. Bye-bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
I'll share some cool links in the Facebook chat.
Perfect. Bye-bye.
Bye.